Tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai haere mai ki tēnei hui, ko Robert Scott toka wingo. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to hearing 15C, which concerns land that was notified in the proposed Far North District Plan within one of the rural zones, and where the submitter is requesting a rural zone and also for some urban zones. My name is Robert Scott. I'm the chairperson for these hearings. With me for this hearing is Councillor Felicity Foy on my right, Councillor Steve McNally on my left, and on the far left, Commissioner Alan Watson. I wish to add that if Commissioners Foy and McNally are not returned to Council following the local body elections, they will remain on this panel as independent hearing commissioners. Both having received certification under the Making Good Decisions program. In the meantime, we wish them well in the upcoming election. Please, everybody, get out and vote. So this is a hearing under the Resource Management Act 1991 to consider submissions and further submissions on the proposed Far North District Plan relating to this topic, where we have been appointed by the Far North District Council as independent hearing commissioners to hear submissions and make a recommendation to the Council on any changes to the district plan as notified. We're not intending to issue interim recommendations at this stage, and we will be hearing all of the submissions before issuing a complete set of recommendation reports. That said, we do hold interim deliberations, and we have sent out interim guidance on selected matters. In the interests of natural justice and efficiency, until our final recommendation reports are released in late March 2026, any deliberations will remain confidential. The exception to this rule is, of course, the two versions of interim guidance that we had released previously. Just as an introduction to myself, my background is in planning, and I've been a planner since 1992 and an independent commissioner since 2014. I mainly practice in Auckland, but I also undertake commissioner work in Queenstown, Gisborne, Tairāpiti, Christchurch City, Tauranga City, and the Bay of Plenty Regional Council. So I'll just get the other commissioners to briefly introduce themselves, starting with Councillor Foy.
Tēnā koutou katoa, Felicity Foy aho. I am from the Te Hiku area, Muri Whenua specifically. And I have background in town planning, but am currently elected to the Far North District Council for under 20 days now and counting. So we'll see if my job application to the public goes through or not.
Thank you.
Steve McNally, still a councillor for a little bit. On the commissioner role, my background was property valuation and development. So I know a bit about the planning from the other side of the desk, and I'll be here for a bit longer.
Yeah, Hudson, I've got a background in planning and commissioner work, and I guess in the far north context, I did live in Whangarei with my family at an earlier time and worked extensively through Northland. Hi.
Great, thank you. We just need to check to see whether there are any conflicts of interest amongst the Parliament, and I think Commissioner Foy wants to declare something.
Yes, one of the submitters today, being Fiona King, is my family member, so I won't take part in any of the discussions and also not part of the deliberation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for acknowledging that. Anything else from any of the other members? No, we're good. I don't think we have any procedural matters that we need to address, council officers.
We do have a few, but they are part of the presentation, but I can jump to them now if we want to start there.
Okay, well, I'm happy to be in your hands, so what would you rather do now? I'm happy for you to address those later.
Okay, they're on the first couple.
Okay. We haven't got anybody actually sitting in front of us, so I won't introduce how to conduct themselves at a hearing. So what I think we will do is just quickly do some housekeeping matters from our hearing administrator. Okay.
Sure. Okay, so the lovely lady Taylor this morning told us where the bathrooms are. I think the only other thing would be everyone make sure they've got their notifications on their laptops turned off and their phones off, and we will be recording today's session, which will go online later today.
In case of fire,
in the case of a fire emergency, we will head out either of our exits and assemble in the far corner of the car park. Thank you.
break times?
We are only planning to have one break today, which will be after council has done their presentation, and we will have lunch, and then we'll come back in here for our submitters.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, without any further ado, we will hand it over to council officers to introduce the topics that we are going to be hearing evidence on today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I'll turn the presentation over to Ms. Pearson to go through and introduce yourself and the witnesses that we have here today.
Kia ora tātou, I'm Melissa Pearson. I am the reporting officer for the rural component of Hearing 15C. But as that's sort of the lion's share of some of the issues that are going to be heard this week, I'm doing most of the presentation this morning, but I have Sarah Trinder here with me as well, who will be taking over at some point to discuss the urban rezoning submissions, and I'll also at some point in the presentation be handing over to Dr. Reese Hill, who will be talking to you about the work that he did to underpin my recommendations for the Okorihi precinct. Let's try the clicker.
Oh, over this way.
Go this way?
Yeah. Come on.
Doesn't
Got
like
a-
Just this one. Right, so there were 3 reporting officers that worked on the reports for this hearing. Obviously, Ms. Trinder and myself are here today. Mr. Jerome Wyeth was also the reporting officer for 2 submissions, one from Health New Zealand and NAPA Generation. He isn't here today as neither of those submitters are appearing or elected to appear. But if you do have any questions for Mr. Wyeth, he has said that he would be able to call in if required. And in terms of the other experts, Dr. Reese Hill from Land Systems is the only expert we have today. But we do have Mr. Matt Collins from Abley. He has tabled rebuttal evidence for 4 different submitters that we'll be hearing throughout this week. He will also be calling into the hearing on Thursday. Then we also have Milan Absalom and Elizabeth Morrison, expert landscape architects and ecologists respectively, and they will also be attending. Ms. Absalom is attending in person on Thursday, and Ms. Morrison's attending online. And then we also have Victor Hensley will be coming from Whānau District Council again on Thursday to discuss infrastructure questions. So a lot of the council experts are coming on that day, but if you have any questions earlier on that we'd like to foreshadow for them, we can take note of those, pass those on, and they'll be available for questions.
Yeah, I think what we tend to do is accumulate our questions for council officers as we hear evidence as well, and then put them to you and allow you to address them as part of your verbal reply. So I think that'll work in well with those experts being here on that day as well. Yeah, thank you.
Also, there's Lawrence McGrath from Econ, expert economist. He isn't available this week, but he will be here for hearing D next week. So if there are economic-based questions, we may have to save those up. Obviously, hearings 15 and C and D are quite tightly interconnected. So some of those matters, he will be available next week to answer questions on those. I think that's all for that one. I think
No,
I need
it's
to
not
take control, okay?
Yeah.
So we do have a few procedural matters. The first one was, too far.
So maybe it did work then, because I only.
Maybe it's just very,
Very
very
slow.
slow.
Yeah.
Right, I'm going to stop touching the clicker
Okay,
and
I'll
just
just
leave it to you.
Cool.
The first matter is just clarifying, we do have a couple of submitters that are, I guess, jumping between hearings depending on what suited them. So we've got Audrey Campbell-Freer has got submission points that span both hearings 15C and D, and she's elected to present on all three of the issues, including her request for rural residential rezoning that I responded to. She's presenting on that next week. Victoria York and Andre Galvin, this timeframe didn't work for them, so they are presenting as part of hearing 17. And then you'll be hearing from a range of submitters this week that I've reported on, but also span across to 15D matters because they are in close proximity to Kerikeri-Waipapa. So that's a lot of the submitters along Waitoto Drive, such as Jeff Kemp, etc., and they're presenting this week. Just wanted to clarify briefly about the extent of information that I relied on when making the recommendation about the rezoning request from Robert Simtes, who has two properties at 90 and 90A Meadow Road. Just to be really clear, it was only publicly available information in terms of the submission made by a neighbour on the Kerikeri-Waipapa Spatial Plan that I noted. It provided helpful context, but it wasn't a determining factor in making my recommendation, and if I also wasn't aware that that submission had been made, it wouldn't have changed my recommendation. So just to be clear, it wasn't a determining factor. There was also in the rebuttal evidence of Mr. Kemp alleged that my 42A report didn't address the submission of Brian and Catherine Susan Hutching. I've gone back and checked, and that submission is addressed in paragraphs 386 and 407 of mine. That's all for those ones. Is there any questions?
Questions on any of those? I don't think so. Thank you.
So we're just going to take you through, obviously we're the only ones in the room. I don't want to provide additional context that you don't need, but I'll briefly talk through the minute 14 and rezoning criteria that both Ms. Trinder and I were using to inform, to provide a framework for making our decisions, to try and make sure that we were making consistent, clear, evidence-based decisions. Just going to touch on some common themes that we noted in reviewing the evidence that we received and reviewing submissions. Then I'll hand over to Sarah to talk you through the rezoning requests, and then I will finish with the rural ones. And next slide, please. I'm not going to go through these in a lot of detail. Really, the only point I wanted to make was that with the minute 14 criteria, the onus was on the submitter to provide a response to these matters. These, obviously that for submitters that chose not to opt into that process, the only information that the reporting officers have had to go on was what was in the original submission. So in terms of council providing a response to the minute 14 matters, both Ms. Trinder and Mr. Wyeth and myself, we have responded to those in full where the submitters have opted in and provided us with evidence, but we didn't do a full Appendix 1 analysis for every single submitter that came through, because in a lot of cases there wasn't enough information provided to make a corresponding assessment. Next slide, please. These are the rezoning criteria. I've just put up the ones for urban at this point, but the rural ones are quite similar to these, but with less of a focus on infrastructure and more of a focus on different high-level policy direction. Obviously, NPSUD for urban, some NPSHPL for rural. These, to be really clear, were not instead of minute 14 criteria. We didn't give them more weight than the minute 14 criteria. They were more specific criteria that were building on the issues that minute 14 had already asked submitters to address. But as a team of reporting officers, we felt it was important to add some structure and some rigour to why we were making the recommendations that we were, to try and get some consistency across the board. That's really all I was going to say about rezoning criteria, unless there were any specific questions. They were obviously put forward as part of the Hearing A Section 42A report. Right, moving on. Common themes. The first one, the first page of common themes are really focusing on some of the trends that we saw in terms of the level of information that we were provided to help us inform our recommendations. We did see key gaps in supporting information from submitters, both, and that's including our opt-in submitters. There was a real range in terms of the degree to which the submitters chose to engage in that process and what they provided. But common gaps are traffic effects, landscape, particularly in the coastal environment, and dealing with some of those outstanding natural landscape, standing natural features, high natural character overlays, and very little economic evidence provided in terms of trying to understand what the argument was for additional residential capacity. We had quite a few submissions where there was a lack of engagement with either affected landowners or adjoining landowners. In a lot of cases, we have submitters requesting rezoning for a lot of land that they don't own, and it was difficult for us to understand the degree to which any of the affected landowners were aware of what was being proposed. We have a few examples of situations where rezoning was interacting with the state highway in some form, and I don't think we had any evidence of engagement with NZTA from any of those submitters. Quite a distinct lack of engagement with tangata whenua, and I think that's a fairly consistent thing across the board. And in some cases, there was an absence of a mechanism to ensure key elements of the rezoning proposal were met. Some of those have attempted to have been met, and we'll be hearing about those on Thursday from Lakeland Farms, as they have pivoted from the original evidence that they submitted in June under Minute 14 and have come back with a mechanism, a development area, to try and remedy the issues that I raised in my 40 tray report. We go to the next slide. These are more common themes that we were seeing in terms of arguments for the need for additional capacity. Very consistently, the message, particularly around rural residential land around Kerikeri-Waipapa, is that it's a critical piece of the puzzle, and questions raised about whether or not that sufficient residential capacity of urban zoning is actually there, and a lot of submitters are saying that rural residential would fill the gap. And obviously this will be discussed in a lot more detail next week, but just wanted to start the hearing with a bit of a reminder or summarisation of the package of alternatives to just upzoning more rural residential land that the collective reporting officers have recommended. It has been recommended to create a medium density residential zone in a town centre zone, and that's in Australia's recommendations from here in 14. There is some greenfield upzoning recommended around the Kerikeri town centre. Again, that is being discussed in the hearing next 15D, that's next week. There were also some recommendations from hearing 14 that add a bit more supply to the pot in terms of a permitted pathway for minor residential units and a few other rezoning changes. I didn't actually put it up there, but the other key component looking outside of Kerikeri-Waipapa is also the recommendation to amend the minimum lot size for the rural lifestyle zone. So that would take it down to from a 2 to 4 hectare window to a 1 to 2 hectare window. So that in of itself also adds more supply. And the other element that probably hasn't really been commented on in any of the evidence we received is that the PDP itself, particularly around Kerikeri-Waipapa, did already provide areas of upzoning compared to the operative district plan. We don't really have any submissions either in support or opposition to that. Presumably the landowners are quite happy with that outcome for their land, but that is also forms part of the package.
We would be potentially interested in understanding where those areas were notified and where the spatial plan has added to that, perhaps?
I have a slide on my next
one
with some maps. That might help.
Yeah, that would be interesting. So
yeah, potentially more detail on 15D.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Are we going to get it today? Some of it today, and then next.
This is like a teaser. It was trying to give you so many of the recommendations for this week intertwined with the direction of where 15D recommendations have gone. So we sort of felt we needed to set the scene a wee bit today, so we had some of that broader context in mind before we start getting down to the micro level of individual sites that people were looking for rezoning.
Right, okay.
Again, the weight or the degree to which you consider the Kerikeri-Waipapa Spatial Plan was obviously a hot topic, and a lot of the evidence that came through. Again, this will be dealt with a lot more next week, but the only thing I really wanted to raise is that the goal of achieving a compact urban form, it stems from the PDP strategic direction in its origin. It's not a new concept that has come in halfway through the Schedule 1 process through the spatial plan. It's sitting there in SD UFD02. So that is also part of the framework that is guiding the direction of our recommendations, as opposed to solely relying on the spatial plan.
And that was a notified strategic direction.
Yes.
And forgive me for not remembering the evidence for hearing one at this moment, but were there any changes to that strategic direction at all recommended?
This is the notified.
Yeah. Not that I can recall. There was one minor change from one of the strategic direction objectives.
Okay, no, thank you. That's really helpful. That. What was the reference again to that direction?
It's SD UFD02, and in full it says urban growth and development consolidated around existing articulated networks within town centres, supporting a more compact urban form, affordability, and providing for a mix of housing typologies. And so that's direction that has been set from notification.
Okay, thank you.
Then I guess the last thing I wanted to add, just in terms of adding more supply into the package, the subdivision Section 42A report is being released tomorrow, and without going into detail of what's coming in that, I understand the reporting officer for that chapter has been considering if there are any other options to provide some other pathways for subdivision in the rural zone without exacerbating reverse sensitivity effects. So it's something that is potentially being considered as an option.
We look forward to that.
So next one. Next slide.
It's gone.
Right. Now, I apologise in advance for the fact that everything is grey in the operative, in the proposed, but the key area of upzoning in terms of rural residential is the larger oval on the left. So in the operative district plan, we've got a section of land between the Waipapa River in the north and the Waipapa Road in the south, and that's the area that was upzoned from rural production, being the light green, and it's now got the grey diamonds, which is your rural residential. And that Waipapa stream in the north has really become the firm boundary of as far as you want rural residential going before we hit the horticulture precinct.
Is that the land where there's the sports grounds? And
the sports grounds, you can see
is that the big,
on the PDP, it starts all going purple.
Yeah.
And the sports grounds are the light green below the new area of light purple.
Okay, so it's to the east of the sports ground.
Yeah, so northeast of the sports grounds. Yeah. There was also some limited upzoning of rural lifestyle up to the northeast of Kerikeri and Waipapa. Those are a little bit more limited in the areas, but they were also upzoned as well. And there may be a few other pockets, but those were the key ones that I was aware of.
And the other two circles?
Oh, those are the ones those are the upzoning from, you've got general coastal, and they've been upzoned to rural lifestyle.
So when you look at the PDP, is that Waitotra Road just to the right of the sports fields?
It is, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. Any other questions on the spatial stuff before we move on?
Exactly.
Okay. Do you want to say?
Hold on.
Yes, you will.
Tēnā
I will hand over.
koutou katoa, I'm Sarah Trindra, I'm the policy planner at council, and I've written the urban zoning requests for this report. So we had 77 original submissions and 35 further subs. 8 submissions in support of the notified zone and 6 opt-in submitters. This is what Melissa was talking to before. 6 submitters took the opportunity to engage in the full turning process. So we had some key spatial areas where we had a grouping of submissions. So Paihia, Aripara, Kaitaia, Kaikohe, Omapri. Most common request was an upzone from rural production, rural residential, or mixed use to residential. So we had a few recommendations that came out of, oh sorry.
Next one.
I know you're right, yours great.
My report covers a few recommendations. So we had some zoning areas that were recommended to be amended. Zone and provision amendments in relation to the Matari Bay subdivision, Kerikeri Properties submission. General residential rezoning for 6 Bedgood Close in Paihia. Additional parcels added to the hospital special purpose zone, and additional light industrial land added to the demolition site. Next slide, please. Okay, so we had new evidence or rebuttal evidence from the 3 submitters. So we had Ngā Kāinga Maka or Ngā Te Iringa Charitable Trust has provided additional planning evidence along with corporate evidence and statements. And the new position is a narrowed relief seeking approximately 4 hectares of land for general rezoning. Kerikeri Properties have also presented planning rebuttal evidence and supported the recommendations and are seeking additional zoning of stage 2 of their land. Ken Lewis Limited in Kaitaia have presented planning and economic rebuttal evidence. Have any questions on any of my recommendations?
Yeah, I had a couple. The Kerikeri-Waipapa Spatial Plan timing, how's that time to fit in with the PDP?
In what way, Mr. Chair?
Well, Melissa indicated that there was the spatial plan would have some impact on the PDP, but I don't understand the timing of it.
So what we have is a key strategic document there that has statutory weight in the MPSUD in terms of supply. So we've also got a range of submissions who have landed in a similar position to the Kerikeri-Waipapa Spatial Plan to Patakuria. So there's some alignment, and I guess we have looked at a lot of economic evidence around demand and supply to direct where we look to advance some of those, along with infrastructure advice around when and how to advance some of those options. A lot of that will be talked about in more greater detail through 15D.
The next thing that Melissa brought up was lack of consultation with NZTA, Tangata Whenua and adjoining landowners. By who?
By the submitters.
By the submitters. Would they need to do that, given that they're just advising their concern?
It's one of the matters that was put forward in minute 14 to say, provide us with information as to the extent to which you have undertaken those things. A lot of the submitters have come back and said, this process, the Schedule 1 process of notification is our engagement. And if anybody had a problem, then they should have made a further submission and got involved that way. Which a lot of it for me is proportional. If it's one person, one site, you know, it may be that it's not as important, but some of these submissions are asking to rezone hundreds and hundreds of hectares. In some cases, some of the result of that would be a significant change to the communities. In some cases, for example, Luckwood Farm near Rainikohe, that would effectively double that settlement size. So for me, it's a level of engagement that should be proportionate to where you are, how much you're asking for, and the degree of change that would be happening in the area.
Just in relation to that one you mentioned there, Ringikota, the NZTA, it's a long way away from.
That's not one of the ones that we're concerned about for NZTA.
But the engagement, you referred to engagement with all those people, and they need to.
NZTA would only be in situations where the proposed rezoning was impacting the state highway. That's not a mandatory requirement for everyone.
But noting that there are statutory powers and tools that NZTA has around access to state highways that would eventually, could consequentially eliminate any prospect of development on the site anyway. So it's a suitability question.
Wouldn't that come later then? That's why I asked for timing.
Often it doesn't. It's one of those that, as council officers, we don't want to be recommending an option that you live zone and then NZTA scuttles the ability of that zone to be used. So it's one of those information requirements. It's more than just consultation or engagement of, hey, let's just let you know how it's going. It's more of a, here's what we're proposing. Is this feasible? And what sort of upgrades would be required? It doesn't necessarily mean you have to do those upgrades before it gets live zoned, but say in the case of Mutton Family Trust that we'll be hearing from this afternoon, there's a lot of potential if their land is upzoned settlement for future subdivision there, and a lot of fragmented landowners all relying on one intersection with the state highway. And if there isn't sort of a mechanism or something put in place prior to live zoning to actually make sure that those properties contribute to the necessary upgrades to the state highway, it's really hard to do it through the resource consent process later on.
Yeah, it needs to be done like the power companies do, where the first fellow pays for it all and then the ones coming in get to pay him back. Mm-hmm. Last question relates to compact urban form, infrastructure capacity. So now I've got, the questions here relate, I'm a councillor, we're dealing with this all the time, and also on the Regional Transport Committee, so the transport comes into it, including our highway network. Infrastructure capacity, if we go high compact form, majority of our infrastructure, particularly sewage, can't cope right now with any increase.
We've, again, a lot of the detail around that is particularly around 15C. We've been given advice around funding and capability from suitable parties. So we understand that there's robust work to come, but similarly, we realise that there's certainly work to come to support it. But again, what we're looking at in front of us is a mix of 30 years worth of supply. It is not something that gets turned on tomorrow. Certainly a lot of Mr. McElrath has put in a lot of thought around what type of deliverables we'll be needing in accordance with the direction we now have as a Tier 3 urban authority. And again, we're pushed into a position where we need essentially 30 years of supply in an urban context. That doesn't say you must do it, or you can do it in a rural lifestyle context. And that's a requirement that we must now work to provide for.
Okay, thank you.
Just on the consultation by individual submitters with transit or with NZTA, are there any situations where NZTA came to the party and said it would be okay?
There is no engagement or evidence of engagement at all.
No, so no, by nobody.
For 15C.
For 15C.
Yeah, for 15C.
15C.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
What about from NZTA to the PDP in general? Anything?
They've made submissions, but no, I haven't got any submissions from them in the rural topic that we're hearing this week.
They have made submissions on some urban areas.
I don't think we've seen them appear in here.
No. I was wondering whether it was the noise. They turned up for the noise hearing for noise, the district-wide activities 6 and 7.
The 2 hearings I didn't chair.
I've just got 2 part-time questions. The first somewhat has been answered about sort of the catchment for the NZTA consultation, because you brought up a relevant point about the growth areas. You gave the example of Lucklaw Farms, which has a one-way bridge off the state highway, is the only entrance to the whole Kerikeri Peninsula. That was one of the questions for me in terms of the catchment of analysis of effects in that regard, because we have such a huge area of state highway within our district.
That's one of the reasons that I passed over the Lucklaw evidence to Mr. Collins to comment on transport matters. His original memo on Lucklaw Farm pointed out the lack of transport evidence. So then transport evidence has been prepared by Mr. Scanlon, that came through in rebuttal, and Mr. Collins is now responding to that. And as I understand it at a really high level, we can ask questions of Mr. Collins on Thursday, but I understand that he thinks that there's a mechanism to manage the transport effects of the proposal. Yes, so he will be appearing online on Thursday for questions.
The last question I have was about the context of the far north. So you've talked specifically about 7 areas. The far north is such a giant geographic area, and predominantly 70% zone rural, general rural. And with the small part of it being Kerikeri being urban, which affects the whole district, as we've had the discussions. Do you have any comments on that in the context of our district? Because it isn't a small area or a city. It's actually got quite a diverse range of areas, and how we meet that growth, I think, could be done in many different ways.
Yes, absolutely. And yes, the far north is definitely not homogenous. And the rural production zone, it was an issue that came up at hearing 9, and it was heard very clearly from the submitters there that it's difficult, particularly for rural production zone land, to kind of, it's not a one size fits all, and there's lots of different areas that function in different ways. It is something that I've been cognizant on in making recommendations on rural rezoning. And there was a real distinct lack of spatial, I guess, strategy or anything for me that had been done at a district-wide level to really understand strategically where do we actually want the growth to go. And I guess my position was reacting to individual submissions that had asked for little pockets, but there was no, across the board, there's no strategy to help you guide where that should go. And I noted in my 42A report that that is one of the pieces of work that the Far North District Council is considering and working on, to actually put that strategic lens over the district and say which of our rural communities is actually going to be best placed to absorb that growth, and where do we want to strategically put that. But in the absence of that, I did find it challenging to try and figure out where that might go. In a lot of cases, there wasn't a lot of evidence from those submitters. Most of them weren't opt-in submitters. So there wasn't a lot to go on.
So just to expand on what Ms. Pearson has said, in reference to that work is district-wide spatial strategy that's currently underway, and yeah, that's correct. I guess to understand and identify the needs, more detailed needs of some of the more urban settlements across the border far north. And I guess one of the things that as a wider group working in subdivision and rural and rezoning, we have had discussions about, you know, if there are any additional tools that provide just a little bit more flexibility in the interim. Not necessarily anything that's going to undermine the other frameworks. For example, the environmental protection lot subdivision, the benefit lot subdivision, which we also want to make sure we incentivise, but we don't want to undermine the effectiveness of that by providing general rural production, so subdivision rules that are too lean. So trying to balance that along with, again, the needs for more disparate and distal populations to have some sort of option in the interim to try and work through in a way that doesn't undermine all the other objectives around urbanisation as well. So we've got that in mind for as I say, for hearing 16. We recognise that one of the fundamental things that Ms Pearson has acknowledged is that the whānau is not a homogenous beast or being. There's a lot of functions and different communities. My reference to, I never say the community of the whānau, I say communities of the whānau, which I think better reflects the nature of what we have. So, you know, and I think there's particular parts of the whānau that have a different direction. I think, for example, Te Aupōuri, their aspect and how advanced they are in terms of their thinking and plans for the future, for example, and other areas of Mapiri, Punoni, there's a whole range of people that we want to have discussions about around, you know, what's happening and what can we do to assist in a way that doesn't undermine the things that are really important to you. So that work is actively underway around project planning, and we can kick it off very shortly.
Thank you. I've got 3 questions, and this segues into one of them. And I'm happy for you to address this later, but I thought I'd just land them with you now. You can choose to either answer them today or later on, or possibly next week. The first question is, can you tell me how a spatial plan fits into the NPSUD in the context of a Tier 3 urban environment? Just a nice, easy one to start with.
Yeah, so here we'll probably give you a more comprehensive answer, but as a fundamental tenet, it acts as a method of supply. We can rely on that as a method of supply in the long term, but we'll give you more detail. I think perhaps Mr. Lindenberg might refer to that next week in his evidence.
And any relationship to an FDS?
There is no requirement for an FDS for Tier 3s. However, my understanding is that we modelled a lot of the growth work that was undertaken, particularly Kerikeri-Waipapa, on the FDS model to make sure it was robust enough to kind of have a serious long-term lens and robust methodology.
I mean, I think the NPSUD says something like Tier 3 local authorities are encouraged to do whatever Tier 1 and 2 must do. In that respect, is the spatial plan adopting any elements that you would find in a compulsory FDS?
I think some, not all. I think I'd probably defer that again, probably to Mr. McElrath, because there's detail around market.
Yes.
I understand that normally wouldn't be required of Tier 3, so I'd probably defer that one, Mr. Chair.
So in relation to you've undertaken an HBA and you're relying on that to be your baseline economic data?
Not quite, Mr. Chair. Actually, we have done an HBA, but the growth model that's been used for the spatial plan is well in advance of the HBA in terms of a growth scenario. So what the growth scenario proposed for Kerikeri-Waipapa through to Patakuria is that, again, is what they have termed blue sky thinking. So well above, I think, the projections for, and that was a specific demand of elected members and the community, so that there was a situation where, in particular, they could plan for example, infrastructure and not undershoot it, and not always be trying to catch up. They could have a very clear signal about what would be required to be delivered over long term.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of supply, you've referred to 30 years, and I was looking at the NPSUD, and it talks about short, medium term, which I think is 10 years, and then you have medium term and then long term, which is 30 years.
I think 3 years is short term, 10 is medium, and beyond
10,
is,
okay.
yeah.
So obviously you're not required to hit any of those numbers, but you have adopted an outcome that you're basing?
No, I think
Spatial
we are
plan.
required to hit those numbers. I think we are obligated to provide all those plan-enabled and infrastructure-ready. Again, like how we meet that is a choice around whether we rely on, for example, live zone land, or whether we rely on strategic documents to demonstrate that. I would suggest that having a whole lot of greenfield land, well, greenfield infill, a whole lot of live zone land in the short term is probably a higher risk for us to be able to deliver on in terms of coherent infrastructure provision, for example, and very difficult for I don't want to use the term, but I think it's probably an appropriate one, whack-a-mole, with the ability to deliver where we would need to deliver services at the time. So,
yeah, and I think that'll be a theme that we'll be exploring over the next 2 weeks, as to how much should be live zone and where does infrastructure have to be in association with that. So this leads me into another question, and that is it common for a spatial plan to include detailed infrastructure planning and costing as part of that document?
My experience, and I'd be interested to see across the table, is no. It wouldn't be. And in fact, if you look at, again, refer back to the PSUD, it refers to separate strategic documents around infrastructure strategies, for example. It would be common to consider ballpark provisions to understand relative affordability. I think when you're undertaking that level of development, but specific costs I thought wouldn't form part of the spatial plan. Structure plans, yes, more detailed funding and design, network design and capability for treatment would almost certainly have that, and that would be at the point where you would look to determine recovering specific costs on contributions between developer and public around how they're funded, for example.
So in that sense, are there other mechanisms that would follow a spatial planning exercise that would do that work?
Yes, and again, we're actually also undertaking that work as part of the implementation strategy plan for Kerikeri-Waipapa Spatial. Yes, so structure planning, potentially master planning for some aspects of Waipapa, for example. Again, we're in the process of undertaking project planning for those that implementation requirements.
And I assume that the council has mechanisms like an infrastructure plan that it would pursue, and where does the long-term plan fit into all of that as well?
I think the infrastructure strategy is plugged into.
Infrastructure strategy.
Plugged into the LTP. The LTP is what's been termed the LTP Light, based on an option that was provided to council as part of the recovery, cyclone recovery. So that does, to a degree, have an impact. Again, the funding that's been set aside, particularly for Kerikeri-Waipapa, is addressed in, I think, Mr. Lindenberg's evidence as well. So that should be all addressed in there.
So, and these processes are yet to happen as an infrastructure strategy?
There is an existing infrastructure strategy with funding underway,
right?
Already allocated.
And does that is that aligned with where the spatial plan is, or does it need further work?
To my knowledge, it's generally aligned. I think in particular focused on, again, I'd have to defer to Mr. Lindenberg, but wastewater treatment capacity. And also, I think water supply as well is something else that is in there. Again, the detail is touched on in evidence.
Yes, no, thank you. We've got a lot of other evidence asking those sorts of questions. So I thought I'd give you the opportunity to at least lay something on the table for us to understand where council's coming from and that council officers are coming from in that regard. And I think we're going to be going back there again.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Chair, if I may, a couple of things you said there, James. Live zone and infrastructure ready. I mentioned it earlier when I asked a couple of questions, but if the far north, 16 separate wastewater plants. sure that it's how that operates. Infrastructure strategy aligned with long-term plan? I'd say no. Got a lot of work to do there, and that's why I brought it up earlier about the capacity or the compact urban form and infrastructure capacity. And I said it. It's not. We have no capacity, and you can convince me otherwise, but you'll have to do a lot of work to convince me. Vic Hensley will be here, and be interesting to see what he's got to say, because part of what we're dealing with at the moment is actually just understanding what our pipe network capacity is. For example, the Kaikohe sewage plant, the main pipeline from town out to the sewage plant, on a dry day, no rain, it's full. On a wet day, it's flooding. So there's a lot of stormwater infiltration. So there's a problem. And the local water's done well, that will assist, but we are several years away from fixing a lot of that work, and it's a lot of money.
Yeah, so, and that's one of the reasons we haven't recommended a whole bunch of zoned ready land in this instance.
You have done in Kerikeri though, and Kerikeri plant has a similar, the pipe line getting out there is not.
We've got specific evidence on that, and again, like we don't believe we have provided significant additional upzoning land. We've recognised some existing development, and we've looked to identify land through this process that has, as highlighted in the HBA, a longer term horizon of development, particularly in the brownfield area.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether these sort of questions could be directed to Mr. Hensley when he's available.
Yeah.
I think he would be able to draw down to the
Yes.
detail that I think you're wanting.
Happy with that.
Wanting
But
to
it's important. It's very
have at
important.
hand. So again, I think it's a good idea that we lay down these questions and you can ponder them and you can put them perhaps to Mr. Hensley or your other witnesses and feed it back to us at the appropriate time. I've got one more question before I ask Commissioner Floyd if she'd like another. And that this is quite a quick question, and that is, oh wait a minute, I'll scroll down to where I wrote it. To what extent, this is about precincts, so it could be for both the urban and rural plans, but possibly the rural side of things. To what extent does site size play a role in determining the merits of a precinct? I don't think it was one of the criteria, but it's something I'm interested in hearing about. Again, I don't need to hear the answer now, but if you're happy to give me an answer, that would be helpful.
I'm happy to start off. It came up as a question in rebuttal evidence, specifically relating to Kingheim, which is again something we're going to hear about this afternoon. And I agree with Mr. Henahan, how he set it out, that there was nothing in the national planning standards that says that a precinct should be X number of hectares or this many sites. That's not a requirement. But my comments in my 42A report about whether or not you use a precinct and why I wasn't supportive of using it for a single site were more about the efficiency of the plan, and I don't want to say setting a precedent because that's not really what we're talking about for policy, but it is almost that in terms of for a single site where there are existing resource consents in place that actually deliver a lot of what they already want. And when the key message I was getting in pre-hearing meetings was the purpose of the precinct is to avoid the need for future consents if they need to tweak things in the future. That to me wasn't an efficient use of a precinct as a tool, which is why I wasn't supportive of it. But there is no restriction on using it as a tool from the national planning standards level if you wanted to use it for a single site. But for me, there would have to be some site-specific reason why that was the right tool. And I don't think that threshold has really been met for me with the Kingheim example.
Yes, the question was more generic, but
that's all right.
We all know what we were going to be talking about. So thank you for that answer. I think Commissioner Floyd would like to ask some questions.
It can be answered later in the day, but I just wanted to make clear my question now relating to the New Three Waters CCO and the fact that I think last month, we laid out the next 10 years of projects that were approved, and none of those projects included any growth projects that have been agreed to by the 3 Northland councils. My question is, how will we provide for growth if we are not contractually agreed to with the 3 Northland councils? Because we're planning for the next 30 years, we know what's the next 10 years, and it's not up to our council to make that decision. It's across the 3 councils in Northland, and 3 Waters controls growth.
Answer that question, Chair. That's something that I was chatting to Vic Kinsley about last week. So I think it would be a very good question to be involved in it. He said throughout the process that the local was done well. He's been raising the fact that the Kerikeri-Waipapa Spatial Plan was in train and that there would need to be a rejig of information that was being put across to the new local was done well process. So I think it would be very useful if we get his commentary on that and how he's been managing through that process.
Yeah, and I think obviously we would probably like a description here for the record as to what the 3 Waters Done Well CCO is, what it does and where it fits. Again, maybe not today, but when we get...
I can tell you, sir, it does 2 waters. Yeah.
That's why it's called Local Waters Done
Local
Well.
Waters Done Well.
We've changed the name, or somebody has.
So otherwise known as stormwater review.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Any more other questions? I think it's really, really helpful to have that discussion. And as I say, setting the scene of the matters that we're particularly interested in too. So.
Thank you.
Right, I might take back over then. We're going to move into the rural part of the presentation. If we can move to the next. That I just should not touch it completely. So the rural rezoning requests were a wee bit more numerous than the urban ones. We had 147 original submissions and 628 further submissions. 16 in support of the notified zone. We had 24 submitters take up the opportunity through minute 14 to opt in, and I think the engagement was relatively high. Out of those 24, all but 3 requested a pre-hearing meeting, at least one. Some of them we had multiple, and 14 of the 24 provided some form of pre-circulated evidence, as well as one hearing statement from a further submitter. So there was a reasonably high level of engagement. The key spatial areas that were the target of rezoning requests, obviously the edge of Kerikeri-Waipapa with a lot of requests for rural residential, the back of Akipara, the southern tip of Kaikohe, looking for some rural res down there, a couple of spots on the Russell Peninsula, a couple of spots on the Kerikeri Peninsula, specifically Rangaputa, Tokoro Beach, and South Hokianga. So there were a variety of requests along there. And probably not surprisingly, the most common requests were upzoning from rural production to either rural lifestyle or rural residential. Oh, it's going to struggle. There we go. I'd like to start off with the horticulture precinct as a starting point. And the key reason for this is that in terms of the progression from where we landed at the end of hearing 9 to where we are now, it is probably the biggest change that I've recommended in my footage-way report. The idea of changing from a horticulture zone to a horticulture precinct originated in hearing 9, and there was direction from the panel to investigate changing to a precinct and then draft a precinct chapter to show what that would look like, and that's what I included at the end of my right of reply. The hearing panel subsequently issued minute 22, which directed expert conferencing on soils to assist with really forming that evidence base to understand where those soils actually were. Unfortunately, we didn't have any submitters take up that opportunity, but that did not stop Dr. Hill moving on his own. So, yes, that going to pass over to Dr. Hill in a moment. He can talk you through his process and the data sets and the information that we use to inform that process. Noting that soils are only one piece of the puzzle in terms of my recommendations. They were the starting point, but then I needed to overlay some other considerations in terms of finding logical boundaries, making sure that we had a cohesive precinct rather than one that was really fragmented and allowed pockets of other development to come into it. So that was sort of the step that I took after Dr. Hill had completed his work, although it was collaborative because I wanted to sense check where we were trying to decide where the boundaries might go, to then take it back and put it through a soils lens and go, if we move the boundary here, does that still make sense? But I just wanted to start with the end result, just for some context. So this is figure 4 in Dr. Hill's report, and it shows the entirety of the horticultural zone as it was notified, with the black outline and the bits that are popped out. The areas that I have recommended be dropped out of the horticulture precinct are those that are in white hatching. And the end result is that the horticulture precinct is 22% smaller than the horticulture zone was when it was notified. So I think it's been a really useful exercise to figure out where there were areas of soils that maybe didn't stack up as much as some of the others. But you'll notice that a lot of the recommendations to remove land are on the interfaces with the rural production zone. So the recommendation that goes along with dropping those out of the precinct is that they are rezoned rural production rather than upzoned to some other form of residential development. I might pass over to you, Reece.
Kia ora, everyone. As Ms. Pearson's mentioned, I was commissioned by Far North District Council to undertake or develop a more defensible framework and method for a revised horticultural precinct. My methods contained in the report, revised soil and land use capability criteria to inform the delineation of a horticultural precinct in the Far North Plan, which I believe you've got a copy of. It's available. I've got some notes in terms of providing a bit of an overview, which I can go through just to at least set a bit of a scene and questions from that. It's been put up on screen as well. Well, the purpose of my report was to, one, contain a new method and look at improving the method that was previously used. I guess the main limitations of the existing method was that it was heavily based on regional scale LUC, New Zealand Land Resource Inventory, land use capability data, and pretty much that alone, which is at a scale of 1/50. So it is regional scale, it's not property scale. There are a number of there was evidence presented by Mr. Cathcart and others that identified some issues with that data, some specific to the Northland region as well, primarily around historical inaccuracies and misclassifications. But on top of that, we've also, because we're using that scale and data, some of the boundaries, they're not going to be accurate and precise. I'm not sure which one it is. So when you look at flat land and it has a slope on it, for example, the LUC boundary might sit on the flat land instead of being capturing that break in topography. So, as Mr. Pearce mentioned, I had to come up with a method pretty much independently, but working alongside a GIS analyst, Louis Worthington at Property Group, was very efficient, really good. So we had a lot of bits and pieces to try and bring together, I guess. The main changes in the revised method really were using what I call a hierarchy of evidence. So we have some other data sets. I looked through and to see what we could add to just using the LUC. So one of the data sets was SMAP, which at the time only covered 301 hectares or 304 hectares of the area, unfortunately. Now, SMAP is considered to be better quality in terms of soil, providing soil information. Primarily a little bit about scale, but also accuracy in terms of characterisation. The other piece of information we looked at was land cover database. So basically these slides.
We'll get to
these are later on down the track. The utilisation of land cover database, which is a nationally available layer. The most recent was in 2018. However, I do know that it will be released soon. So that gave us an indication of where horticultural cropping areas were spatially within those areas. And then another layer that I identified was the irrigated land layer, which again, these are regional scale layers really. That's where irrigation is currently placed. So by putting these all together and overlaying them, it provided more certainty around whether that's going to be horticultural land or is more likely to be horticultural land. And I'll go on to the next stage, I guess, is at that point in time, with all those available spatial layers, that's when the GIS analysts put those together in an automated way to create the first map on the left there, which pretty much the green is where all those are mapped. And there were other criteria that I used to drop out at that stage, and that was based on some cascade evidence and handles evidence, removing a lot of class 4 land or putting it into a checkbox to have a look at visually at the second stage, which I'll talk about. There were other areas there which were dependent on things like SMAP Baltic soils, and the big red area to the right hand of the Kerikeri block there is an example of that. And also to the southern boundary there is another example of this Baltic soils. So those were all put in place in the GIS kind of process. The second stage that I moved to was to say, well, in the absence of going on the ground and driving around and mapping the whole lot, what can we do? So I had a think about that, and we did have some other information that I could use from desktop, one being aerial imagery, more recent aerial imagery. Now that was useful, one for seeing if there's horticulture in place. Especially so because the land cover database was 2018 imagery. So there's there's a decent sized gap there, so things could have changed. You can identify some land aspects from aerial imagery as well, like some boulders if the imagery is good enough. We also had a more detailed DM slope available. So Louis from Property Group created a map that I could identify greater than 15 degrees and less than 15 degree areas. You can put that in, we could have put that into the automated process, but it's quite a big task, and given our time constraints, thought that it may be easy to do that visually. The other part that I found for past work is that sometimes you may end up with a less than 15 here, and you've actually got to have a broader view of it. So actually for me to be able to look at it visually and make a call on, well, actually it's probably going to be predominantly over 15, so I would in the field probably class it as LC class 4 rather than 3, and vice versa. Following that, the maps on the right-hand side there provide a little bit more detail, and the reason we did this was really to inform some decision, not decisions, but provide a bit more guidance as to how I would look at those areas in terms of, are they swinging more towards include, or would I say, well, actually, if we wanted to remove these, then I'm more comfortable, and that would be a possibly exclude. There's also the darker brown there, which is that fall under pretty much come under exclude. Just to go back, in terms of my process for looking at this, I pretty much looked at all the check areas, worked my way around all the area. But just because it said check, or if it didn't say check, I still checked it. So I kept an eye on anything that looked a little bit out of place or wrong. So I guess you could say that it's using the best information you've got available. It's got an extra layer of expert kind of review, and just the hierarchy of evidence, providing a bit more certainty about being horticulture land. So in terms of the outcome, I've got some numbers here. Do you want me to go through those, or is that something you do?
No, you do.
Yeah, okay. In terms of the impact on from the original horticulture zone, which is around 6,800, nearly 6,900 hectares, it was reduced by about 1,500 hectares through this to proposed HP of 5,326.4 hectares.
Did you say 1,500 hectares reduced?
Yes. Yes. So if you look further down the track, those maps probably show.
I think if you go back up one.
Well, back up one, yes. That's right.
If you go back up to the one with the white hatching, it works out to be about 22%.
Yeah, that, I was going to say, so that 1,500 hectares is approximately 22% of the notified.
Okay.
Yeah,
Please get the math right.
Not the numbers from you.
I was just trying to put the area with the percentage.
Yes.
And, okay. Yes. So the maths works both ways. Great.
A little bit more detail around that is it equates to around 45% of the LEC 4, 5 and 6 was removed through this change, but only 10% of classes, LEC class 2 and 3 was removed. So a higher proportion of non-high versatile soils was removed. And as you will see, that there are still some large red areas within boundary and around the edges. Maybe that's more of some of this piece of it in terms of.
Have you had a look at what this might look like if class 3 were removed?
No,
Do you mean from the NPSHPL?
Yeah. I mean, you're not obliged to do it.
Okay, yeah.
Because it's not a thing yet, but I'm just wondering whether you had considered it.
Off the top of my head, I can provide some guidance. Having driven around this couple of hours yesterday up the Waipapa portion, is predominantly class 3s too. So you would have a major impact, and a lot of that, I haven't got it, it's not in here, but it would have a major impact on the predominance of the area would be class 3.
It might yet be a thing that we have to have regard to. Not yet. And obviously be interested in what it does, not by just land area, but what it does spatially. In terms of, you've got two reasonably coherent blobs of land, and it'd be interesting to see what class 3 would do to that coherence.
I think I would start off with the fact that the horticulture zone was notified prior to the NPSHPL coming into effect. It also wasn't notified with the express purpose of giving effect to the NPSHPL. That's not its purpose. Its purpose isn't to give effect to the NPSHPL. Its purpose is to provide some protection for the horticultural industry and the investment in horticultural infrastructure that has been put in place around Kerikeri-Waipapa, and that is valuable regardless of where the NPSHPL moves, and almost, in my view, this mechanism becomes even more valuable as the NPSHPL potentially drops out LUC3.
Right, so I think what you're saying is, if we have to address that, there would be some arguments that says the horticulture precinct should still retain some areas of LUC3.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
For broader context,
it's good to have that
yes,
heads up now.
across the far north, in terms of what that would do if you dropped out LUC3,
Yeah.
there's only a couple of hundred hectares that are LUC1. It's under, I think it's only about 900 hectares that are LUC1 anywhere in the whole district. And in terms of LUC2, there's only about 2% of the land area that's LUC2. So if Life 3 disappears from the NPS HPL, then a lot of the provisions that you'll read in the Rural Production Zone chapter or coming through in the subdivision chapter, if you read them and you think, right, those are the ones that relate to the NPS HPL and the definition of highly productive land, that's really only going to apply to 2% of land every day. So as a tool for the Far North in terms of protecting the land that the Far North is using as the most productive land, it becomes rather ineffective. And it's why a mechanism like the horticultural precinct, in my view, becomes even more critical, because it's specifically designed for the Far North context and the land that the Far North is used as productive. Some other parts of the country, maybe LUC3 isn't that useful to them. They've got a lot of LUC 1 and 2, LUC 3 is maybe not as important. For the Far North, the message that we've had from submissions, and we've heard it through from the horticultural industry back in Kerikeri is that LUC 3 is actually really important. And we heard it from the Far North, from the Northern Regional Council as well, that even in some cases 4 is important. And that's the region-specific context, which is different from, I guess, the national direction.
Okay, no, that's a very useful explanation. Thank you. Sorry, Dr. Hello.
Good question.
I think that's all I had to say on that. Do the SMAP update.
I can do the SNAP update.
Yeah. So, as things can sometimes happen, I think the day after we finalised this report and a new version, the SMAP version came out, that covers the whole area. I had approached Landcare, Kenra Landcare Research to see whether we could get it in and released to bring it, but they were able to do that because they do have their set release dates every year. Strangely enough, I arranged them about 10 years ago to keep everything simple. So it came back to bite me. But in essence, what I did is, Louis Property Group put together some simple maths to try and demonstrate the impact. And overall, it actually agreed really well with what we've got. There were some areas, I've put some yellow circles there on ovals on the left-hand map, which is the original map, just as a guidance, really just to hone it into areas so you can look across. So this first map, I looked at the 3 layers that were used in the as criteria, one being soil classification. So this is really about identifying ultic soils, podzols, and glaze soils to a lesser degree that aren't suitable for horticulture. So on the right-hand side, the red is the podzols and the ultic soils, predominantly ultic soils. The lighter coloured, I don't know, bluey-green colour to me is the glaze soil. So they're wet soils, the glaze soils are wet soils. Not too many, but a bit of an area right through the middle. As you can see, there aren't too many occurrences of the red inside in the 2 areas. Also in the Waipapa, there's a large area in the kind of centre there, which is you can't really do much about that. If you were to take take boundary through there, then we'd start to be cutting things up. It's contiguous in terms of the present boundary. Down in the southern area, the Kerikeri, there's only really the very south corner there in the white hashed area, and to the right-hand side on the east side boundary, the ultic soils encroach there as well. A little bit down around the boundaries, down the more southwest. So that fit, we were pretty happy with that, the way it fitted together, and agreed with what we've been using. So go to the next one, please. This is soil drainage. So I did a similar approach, and the orange colour on the right-hand side map is perfect drainage, so it's not poorly drained, it's not really wet, it's not really dry, it's in between. That's largely associated with the older ultic soils. So that kind of aligns with the soil classification there. Again, not too many differences from the soil order in terms of areas that wouldn't kind of meet what we want them to, but they are relatively in line with the left-hand side map that we've been using now. So there's nothing really that stands out as being totally different. There will be some slight area differences. Possibly the biggest one on the right-hand side map down in the Kerikeri is red area moving through, and those are fully drained soils. So they're in the gullies. It's picked them up in more detail, spider scale. That's really what it's about.
Dr. Hill, if I could just ask a question about drainage. Sometimes drainage helps soil productivity, and sometimes better drainage doesn't really do anything.
Yeah.
Does any of this mapping differentiate that, or is that needs to be determined on site?
That needs to be determined, yes. So drainage in the sense here, we're talking about the soil, the inherent drainage of the soil's profile.
Yes.
Yeah.
In other words, if you had better drainage, the soil would be more productive, versus if you had better drainage, it's still the same, same soil, but it wouldn't improve its productivity because it's got a poor chemical structure to start with. Does any of this help any of those sorts of determinations? Because I think in here it was put to us previously, around about hearing 9, I think, that better drainage would help in some cases.
Yes.
Do you have a better insight into that now?
So if you were to put drainage and yes, you can definitely, there are occasions where you can put in drainage and it will move the water out. Peat soils, for example. You can lower the water table, manage the water table better, so it allows seasonal, at least seasonal production. There are examples there. Another soil down in Waipapu is the Te Iringa soil, which is poorly drained with Horatu soils, which are well drained. That's most of the dairy lands in our regions on that. Works really well. The way that the Te Iringa works is it probably would be a class 3 or 4. Put the drains in, and provided they're managed well and they're spaced well, those soils will have the ability to have high production. Not always the case. There are soils I'm familiar with around Auckland where they're heavy clays. And in fact, if you put drains in, you can improve them, but chemistry, the pH, and actually the physical density of the soils doesn't really change what you can do on it that easily. Yeah. So can work both ways. These soils, I think in some instances you could improve.
Yeah, the other problem with soils up here is a lot of them have a pan under them.
Yes.
And the Kaikohe soils have like a gravel. It's all like an ironstone gravel that binds together, and you can drain that all right by fracturing that. Similarly, up north in the sand country, they have a pan under that, and they lose long reach digger to break down for the planting avocados up there. So to break through that pan to let the water go. Right here is a pan under this country. This all looks like it's beautiful. It's actually very wet because it's on a, this is Kerikeri salt loam, most of this, and it's a volcanic extrusion that's created a pan, so, which they mine, that exacts down the vent, they mine at Matari Bay or the fine china, silica.
That's good. Last one? Yeah, I can move to the last one. The last one is the soil depth, which is interesting based on what you just said, Commissioner. That SBAP doesn't, in my mind, it might be a finer scale here, but it didn't really pick up that very local difference in terms of soil depth, which would be created by a pan shell. And again, a bit of a non-event when we compare it back to having any impact on the original maps. So that would be the main point.
You see Waipapa Road's got a volcanic pan under it, Rainbow Falls, Black Rocks, it's all the volcanic flow from up high up. I've dug holes all over this. You can have 8 different soils in a 10 hectare property.
Yeah. I think that's my last slide. So.
Okay. And this is probably where I jump back in again. In terms of translating.
Oh, sorry, are we finished with Dr. Hill now? 'Cause
Oh.
I'm wondering, I think there might be a couple of questions for him. Maybe we should ask them now. Or?
It's up to you. I'm happy for you to keep going if you've got more questions.
Yeah. Well, I've got just one more, if you don't mind. We've had some evidence that suggests that if the land isn't highly productive land, the ESHPL, then it's not really productive and or should be zoned for some form of rural living. Have you got any comments on the productivity of land that isn't HPL and that assertion? Is it productive if it's 4, 5, 6, or even 7?
Yes, yeah, it can be in class 4, yeah, as long as slope's not a limitation. In general, I've tended to agree with the evidence that I don't think it's what I consider highly productive.
It's not whether it's highly productive, it's whether it
productive.
is productive.
Well, I think any land can be productive, but it has to be, in terms of that land use capability, to me, the importance of land use capability is what is that land capable of supporting, what land use is it capable of supporting over the long term. And maybe some of the intensification on those land classes is a bit unproven in terms of long term, but I'd also say, take it back to production, that's good beef country. It's about matching the limitations of the land to the appropriate land use so it can be sustainable over the long term. So generally, maybe up here, I'm aware of situations where there's horticultural class, but I'm not that aware and don't know enough detail in terms of the detail about how sustainable it will be, what management it requires. Generally, the higher the limitation, the more management input is required to get it to produce. That's the beauty of highly versatile soils, for example, is they require minimal inputs in terms of management, so they can, for a range of uses.
Yeah, I have a supplementary question to that. Because of how huge our district is, the soil is one aspect, but the climate is another. And we've talked about the different pockets of climate and how that relates to the soil as well for its productivity in terms of not just horticulture, but we've also talked about agriculture as well. Do you have any comments about that for the far north? Because we're now seeing the kumara growing that was in Dargaville is now being done north of Kaikohe, as well as meeting the early seasons for sweet corn, for example, because of how much warmer it is north of Kaikohe. Did you have any comments in that regard about productivity and the climate in combination with the soil?
Yeah, well, I must say I haven't looked at that specifically, so I'll just, off the top of my head, try and provide some comment. I guess as climate does change, you will have the ability to move crops around, and so having the physical, the soil having less limitations gives you the opportunity for those crops to move into different areas when climate does become appropriate or suitable. Climate is one of the limitations that's identified in the land use capability class. However, the ability to actually get good climate data is quite tricky as well. And I'd say that in that classification, the climate component is relatively basic. So, but to go back to what you're saying, if the soils are physically good and have low limitations, when the climate becomes good for another crop, then suitability is there. So it does provide better protection into the future in terms of being able to diversify, which is, I think, is quite important to consider.
So does that mean that there may be opportunities in the future that are yet to be realised?
Yeah, and it's such an unknown though. I think I recall reading some Cathcart's evidence saying this much. Future technologies haven't allowed us to do these amazing things, but at the same time, for me, it's about retaining the opportunity to be able to do that, especially from a source perspective.
Yeah, and in that regard, it's not just an economics question then.
It's,
Just to support Commissioner Foy, 25 years ago, Jurisdiction Davies were growing mandarins in Kerikeri. They shifted them to Pohora right there, and they actually dug them out and replanted them and proved that there's a 3 to 4 week faster earlier. And similarly with watermelon, New Zealand Watermelon Company up there, Paul, first to market, and the same thing there, 4 to 6 weeks earlier. And spuds, your little perla potatoes and things you get, they grow them up north as well, because they can be a month earlier.
We explored this bit, quite a bit in hearing 9, and we heard that evidence that Whānau has a competitive advantage in that regard, and they hit the market first. I mean,
so I add it to your top ahead. I'll send you a bill.
There are blueberries in Auckland shops, at $6 a tonne, and I'm assuming they're mostly Northland blueberries.
Yeah, there is a lot of them up there.
So they're getting the $6 a tonne when everybody else is waiting for theirs to ripen. Is that? So, and that factors into this climate. Mind you, having said that, the climate could work against the productivity as well, particularly where you've got a shortage of water.
and also less incidence of frost over winter.
Right. Well, some crops need frost, right?
That's right.
That's kiwi fruit, isn't it? Kiwi fruit needs a frost.
At the right time.
At the right time, yeah.
The other thing about the soils is actually being stable enough to get on to plant with machinery.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Which the peat doesn't stand.
No, I think it's really useful information for setting the bounds of the precinct. It's
great. Thank you.
It's needed.
Yeah. No doubt you've done a tremendous amount of work, and that's really appreciated, I think, from the panel.
Tricky puzzle. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. So we sort of threw the cat amongst the pigeons when we said let's go for a precinct. So we acknowledge and thank you for the work you've done.
I think regardless, even if we were still back in zone territory, this work would have been useful regardless.
Yes.
Because the additional information was incredibly useful as we went into the next phase, which was the workshopping phase, which was Dr. Hill, myself, and our GIS expert to put another lens over it and say, right, if this is what soils are, what does that tell us in terms of where the boundaries should go? And this is it's the boundaries that are likely to be the subject of most of the debate through this week. They don't exactly follow every little edge of all of the, I guess they possibly include all the green bits, that wasn't the exercise. But I worked collaboratively again to sort of go back and forth between if we put it here, how much land are we losing? What colour is it? Does it still make sense if we bring it back to here? And the key things that I was looking at were sort of the same as if you were setting a zone boundary, being like, in preference, can we pull it to a defendable boundary that isn't going to move? Can we pull it to a road? Can we pull it to a river? Can we pull it to something solid? If we can't, then a cadastral boundary, but that wasn't the first preference. There was some inherited interfaces that we can't do much about, where we do have horticulture precinct boundaries interacting immediately with rural residential zone land, and that's one of the criticisms that has come through in evidence, is that, well, if you've done it over here and you've got an interface there, why can't you do it up here? And if you were starting again from scratch, potentially you would move it to a different spot, but the only scope we have is to reduce the spatial extent. We don't have anybody asking for it to be pulled forwards. And say, for example, the interface that's between it's on the, if you look at the left-hand side, which is the, I guess, the Waipapa portion of the Hort precinct, and you look to the very far right of that, just below Wet Hubs Farmers, there's an interface there directly between Piro Road and the Waipapa stream, and that is a hard line where rural is and horticulture interface. That is a operative plan line now between countryside living and rural production. So that's why that boundary was there when it was notified. If you had it another way, you'd pull the horticulture precinct probably all the way out to the next road, and that would be a more defendable line, but we don't have scope to do that, so that interface kind of is where it is. But when it came to making other decisions about interfaces, I mean, you can see, again, with the Waipapa side, we have really followed the Waipapa stream the whole way along, and that has formed that very clear line. And understandably, there are submitters that are unhappy with being on the wrong side of that stream, and there would be preference to jump the stream and keep the rural residential going on the northern side of the stream. But from my perspective, even though there are strips, if we potentially go back a couple of slides, there are areas along the side of that stream that come up as red all along that edge, and that's primarily, as I understand it, it's slope, because that's the edge as you're dropping down.
Slope and rocks.
Slope and rocks. So understandably, people sitting in the red on the northern side of that stream would prefer to be taken out, but if you're trying to hold a boundary and say this is actually where our creep and our growth pressure stops, if it was moved, in my opinion, north of the stream, then that just opens it up to the next block of land, to say, actually, me too now, please. And in particular, a lot of that land just north of the stream, to the south of the stream, it used to be zoned rural production. So the land to the south was upzoned, and it's they would like to join that group. But yeah, so there are areas, as Dr. Hill has said, of pockets of red that are popping into the middle of the precinct, and that was one of the key things that, you know, we don't want to create donuts, we don't want to create holes in it, we also don't want to create fingers of rural production or rural residential land starting to break up the cohesiveness of the precinct, because again, it's an area under a lot of pressure for development and growth, and the more you allow fingers or holes or things to break up the cohesiveness, it then just increases the pressure for all of the areas around that. So that's probably the context of why the precinct boundaries look the way they do. The other thing I might just mention.
So that last thing you had.
Go back to orange.
Is that the proposed mapping
It is.
approach? So
Yes.
that's how it would look in the proposed plan?
Yes, so we asked the property group who are at the moment sort of managing what all the different layers look like and all the different colours.
Yes.
We can play around with the colour, but this is the one that actually looked the best with the highest contrast against the green.
Yep. And is there an argument to literally put those two maps in your precinct provisions so that the people can understand the actual spatial extent of the precinct?
It can absolutely do both. I know it's one thing we've done. It was a question that we actually, I think it got raised with Waitangi is again, is it mapped on the PDP maps or is it a separate map that sits within the chapter? My preference is that at a minimum this ends up in the PDP GIS. That's not to say that you then include a separate map that's appended to the chapter that also does the same thing, but if you were to use the GIS and just turn the precinct layer on and zoom out, this is what you'd see.
You'd achieve.
These are effectively, these are what screenshots from the online version would look like for people. The only other thing I've mentioned is that it was brought up as a question mark in evidence about what the holes were, the grey holes, particularly in the Waipapa precinct along the Piro Road. What's up with those? Those are multi-purpose rural sites. You didn't really see them as notified because obviously multi-purpose rural is grey, horticulture zone is grey, and it was difficult to see that there was actually a change in the little symbol on those sites, but those sites were never part of the horticulture zone and hadn't been since notification, and we had no scope to include them in the precinct.
But they're orchards, aren't
They may be, it's just we don't have scope to include them in the precinct because it would be picking up more land than what was originally notified in the horticulture zone.
You talk about no fingers. Does that include the Pukitotra development and the Panari horticulture that's already, Panari Road goes right up to Onikura, it's all horticulture. Not all of it, but it's all the way up there. And the other thing is, the other key factor for horticulture success is processing, factories, cold storage. Sorry, Chair.
No, that's all right. That's good. I mean, there's a lot of overlap here from Hearing 9, and it's really good to see, Hearing 9 progressed into some of this detail. We knew that Hearing 9 said we'll have a precinct, and then we knew we were going to, that this hearing was going to set out the boundaries of that. So again, it's been really helpful. And we'll have a think about whether those two plans should be shown in the precinct provisions. It might help parties, but your explanation too, that it'll be on the GIS layer is also helpful as well. I think obviously we would probably want users of the plan to be able to identify the spatial extent of the precinct in a method.
Mr. Chair, I think it's like the fundamental, with modern planning, the fundamental interface that you have is a planning map, and you put your address in. Like the ISO plans are a very visual animal, and I think there would be some considerable implications if a plan user wasn't aware that if they're looking at property there. So certainly my expectation would be that it would be a layer visible for all to see.
And it might be you do both. You might be able to include a plan at the end of your precinct provisions and have the layer maybe. I would assume there's no problem with doing both.
There's no problem with doing both.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say is that that black writing is also something that would probably come up on the layer in the same way as when you click on site designation. It's got, a number and a reference, or any of the other layers, it actually comes up with a reference. So that PREC1 sends you to that chapter as here's the matching chapter that goes with this layer. So that would also help as opposed to just an orange layer hanging out there by itself.
Okay. Questions?
And that's really where I was going to finish off with the horticulture precinct. The only thing I was going to point out was that the submitters that are directly affected by my recommendation for spatial extent, we have Robert Sintes, who owns the land on Meadow Road next to the airport, or near the airport. That land I'm recommending be pulled out of the horticulture precinct, but instead zoned for rural production. The Voigt properties, Mr. Voigt appeared at Hearing 9 and spoke about that, and turns out that the Voigt property was on altered soils, I think. Yeah, and so there was a big blob of red on the edge of the Kerikeri block, and that has been recommended to be taken out. Mr. Voigt has tabled a letter in support of that recommendation. And then we have New Zealand Eco Farms, who they haven't opted in, provided any evidence to appear at any of the hearings, but their original submission pointed out that only a small portion of their farm could be considered highly productive, and either pull us out of the hort zone entirely or only apply the horticulture zone to their areas of NUC 1, 2 and 3. And on further review, the whole thing could probably be taken out. So their land has been removed as per the request. But those are the three submitters that are directly impacted.
What's the actual impact on Sintes on that? Because I recall reading
Yes.
fairly complex submission from him.
So Mr. Sintes requested, I guess, two parts to his submission. The first was take me out of the horticulture zone, and the second was give me rural residential. So I guess my recommendations are half of what he requested, which was I'm no longer recommending that his properties are included in the horticulture precinct, but I haven't recommended upzoning those two properties to rural residential.
Thanks.
And then we move on to everything else. So just starting off with the recommendations that I have made to support rural rezoning requests. We'll be hearing from Your Construction Limited and a couple of other interested parties in Tubbs Farmland later on this week. But I was convinced by the evidence put forward by those group of submitters that you could rezone Tubbs Farm from rural lifestyle to rural residential, and that in of itself really is just matching the zone with the consented development on the ground. It's not enabling more development or more subdivision, which is different to a lot of the other requests for rural residential that we've had. And that's what really set it apart in my mind. So I've supported that change in zoning. We've got a property in Snowden Avenue that was church land, and it's really consolidating that, lining up the boundaries and making sure that the church forms part of the settlement of Marae. We've got some fixing up of errors where the zones haven't snapped to the cadastral boundaries that Mr. Ross brought to our attention on State Highway 12 in Okanoni. And he's going to be speaking to that later on this afternoon.
Is that the extensive one-page evidence, is it? Or was that another survey?
It was relatively brief.
There seems to be quite a gap in the surveys, the aged surveys. One page is sometimes they flick over one page. The modern surveys write a little bit more. But I think there's a couple of examples of that, especially in the Hokianga.
Yes, then we've got a Waipapa Road horticultural processing facility zone, which was split zoned. I'm still not quite sure how that happened, but I'm recommending to remedy that, make sure that the entirety of the sector facility is included in the horticultural processing facility zone. And then there were 3 properties identified by the Maya Farms that were picked up as natural open space when they are an operational beef farm. So they're in private ownership, operational beef farm. We are putting them back to rural production as they were.
They're just down there.
Back to rural production, still not exactly sure how they got picked up as natural open space.
Productive open space.
Yeah. So there wasn't any new evidence received from submitters that hadn't opted in for the process, the Minute 14 process. So it's very clear that the ones that have opted in are the ones that are invested in taking this through. There was rebuttal evidence received from the list of submitters on the screen. I won't go through and read them all out. I will be responding to these, obviously, in full some capacity in my right to reply. But I just wanted to highlight a couple of these submitters. Most of these submitters have just reiterated what their original evidence said in response to my footage array report, but there are 3 that have amended their proposal since their evidence was first circulated. So the first 2 we've got Mr. Carr. This is in Okorihi. He's looking for more settlement zone land. He has reduced his original request from 8 hectares upzoned to 5.3 hectares. We now have an accompanying scheme plan to show how it will be divvied up, and he's included some more site suitability information for service and geotechnical suitability. So there's a little bit more robust evidence in there, as well as he's provided some more helpful commentary about other parts of Okorihi which are unlikely to be developed and subdivided in the future, and why he thinks his additional 5.3 hectares would help address potential growth in there. So I'll be interested to hear from Mr. Carr later on this week. Meridian Farm Limited have reduced the extent of their rezoning from 68 hectares to 50. This was primarily because I had noted that the extent of their rezoning would create a strange little finger of rural production that would split the rural lifestyle from the horticulture precinct. So in recognition of that, they've pulled it back to avoid that situation, but it would still be 50 hectares of rural lifestyle land. And it would now create a split zone site, which isn't one of the outcomes that I'm generally supporting. And we will hear from Mr. Henahan on that later this afternoon as well. And the final submission I'll touch on is Lucklaw Farms, and this is what we will be hearing on Thursday. The rezoning request for Lucklaw and the Taranaki sort of trustees of the Taranaki Trust and Grace Ann Sturgis has moved significantly from the evidence that they submitted in June. There were several pre-hearing meetings held with this group of submitters between when they got before they put in their evidence and then 2 more after they put in their evidence. So there was, I guess, there should have been no surprises in my 42A report in terms of what I was recommending. It was very clear. So they've obviously gone away in the interim, sort of from July onwards, to work on introducing a Pūwhiki development area and an associated chapter to go along with that. Part of that, they are proposing a reduction in the extent of land to be rezoned general residential and mixed use. They've given a bit more detail about the portions of each, but it still would result in about 1.4 hectares of mixed use and about 120 general residential zone sites. They've also included new transport evidence. But just to foreshadow some of the issues that I've noted come through in their rebuttal evidence, so the panel are sort of aware of my initial thoughts, and these are my thoughts, but also informed by discussions with Absalom, Mrs. Morrison, who have looked at it from a landscape and an ecological perspective, Mr. Collins from a transport perspective, and there will also be some comments from an infrastructure perspective. The chapter provisions really focus on residential activities, and primarily the rural lifestyle provisions. There's not a lot of direction in the chapter for how anything else proposed in the development area would be managed. Particularly things like zip lines, mountain bike parking, glamping, some of the other things. It is clear that the submitter's position is that future resource consent processes will deal with all of those, and the chapter doesn't need to. But that in of itself, I have concerns with, in terms of you put it in a development area and it is effectively preempting the consent process, where you signal that this area is going to be a management plan subdivision, this area is going to be your mountain bike park. The suitability of those activities isn't really being assessed in any detail through the evidence provided to us today, but it's effectively greenlighting those activities for future consent processes, so that it becomes less about is that activity appropriate or not, and more about just the detail of how you execute it. So I find it problematic. You'll hear some more comments on infrastructure later on, but there are issues, in my view, with the practicalities of joint ownership of wastewater assets for over 120 homes plus commercial activities. There are landscape and ecological concerns about the way the cluster subdivision provisions for the rural lifestyle zone have been developed. In particular, that there are no areas set aside or signalled in the development area plan for ecological restoration or enhancement in the rural lifestyle areas. They're all in the rural production areas. So it's not clear how those outcomes will be achieved. And there's also some landscape issues with the way the clustering rule has been put forward, where you, rather than having 2 to 4 hectare size sites, you use areas held on common ownership to kind of average out, so you could get quite a cluster of quite small sites. And from a landscaping perspective, the Absalom has got a concern with that. So they'll be here to answer questions and to talk about those further on Thursday. But I just wanted to signal these up front to the panel that these are some of my initial thoughts. I'm also aware this is one where the consultation and engagement process has solely relied on the Schedule 1 process to do that job. And there wasn't anything put forward to me in evidence as to the extent of engagement with the community or Tangata with this one. And I'm sure that's something that the submitter will want to provide more context for on Thursday. But I'm also aware that not all of the land involved in the rezoning request is managed or owned by the submitters either. So there is additional land that's been caught up in this as well, and I don't have anything in front of me to say whether those landowners are in agreement with being caught up in this proposal either. So there's a few things that are of concern to me at this stage.
Thank you. With regards to development areas, does the plan have any development areas at the moment?
No.
So if we were minded to grant this release, this would be the first. Are there, I think, other proposals that are suggesting a development area?
I think it's coming.
And, or are they supported by council?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that that is well, unless council thinks there is a problem with establishing one, I'm just conscious of whether there are any others in the mix as well.
Yeah, it's a tool, it's a template that we're bedding in through this process. But I think there's several that we are considering at a very late stage to consider and bring in order to see what may or may not work. So it is a live consideration.
And this one doesn't necessarily break the mold. There are others in the mix.
Potentially.
Yeah.
And I don't have an issue in principle with there only being one, if this was the only site where it made sense to have one. And Mr. Langman, who's the planner for Lakua, and I have had quite a few discussions about what the tool might be in our pre-hearing meetings. The context I gave to Mr. Langman was, at this stage, we have precincts in front of us. We have a template for precincts. If you would like to, if you're looking to come up with a tool, that's one that you could look to as a mechanism. But I take his point in that he put forward in his rebuttal evidence that a development area could be a better tool. And I think for me, the key difference is whether or not you think that ongoing management of the area is required once the development is effectively done. And whether or not once the development is done, you could pull back the development area controls and rely on the underlying zone chapters. And that's seems to be the critical difference for me between the tools. Where we've used precincts, I mean, the horticulture precinct being the classic one, those provisions need to continue for the life of the plan. There's no point at which the development is done you could pull back on those. Some of the other ones where they've been used, I understand, as put forward in 15B, for example, things like landscape controls and management of things. There are other things longer term that again need to keep happening rather than just saying the development's done, we can pull back now. Because of the sensitive landscape issues and other issues, I think that's why I was thinking precinct, but also appreciate that those layers will still be there. You know, it will still be coastal, the high natural character area will still be there, the ONL will still be there. So I can understand the position that at some point you could say the development's done and pull back and rely on zone checks and overlays.
If a lot of the activities, say particularly the tourism type activities, needed to be established by resource consent anyway, whether there's a development plan or not.
Yeah.
Would you expect those consents to have some ongoing conditions that would have some of those ongoing things?
That is also, I would expect the consents to manage those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's why it's not a die in the ditch issue for me in terms of which tool we use. It's more if there is going to be some kind of map or plan, whether it's a precinct plan or a development area plan, and it's going to show particular things in particular areas, it has to come along with the chapter that goes along with it and use one of those options.
Okay, great. That's helpful. Anybody else?
Thanks.
We are intending to visit Lakua, and we're hopefully going to do it Friday, which I think times in well with them. I'm going to have a chat with hearing administrator very shortly about letting them know that we'd like to visit on Friday early. And so that's, we are intending to visit properly. So if there's anything you want us to particularly take note of and or look at, happy for you to advise us. You don't have to tell us now, but Thursday afternoon would be helpful.
Sure. That was all from me. So unless I've obviously covered a lot of ground.
Great. I don't think we have any further questions. So I think we'll adjourn for lunch now.
Yes.
And how long are we going to take? How long are you going to give us?
Half an hour. Okay.
We'll adjourn for half. Does anybody require longer than half an hour? And
I'll eat fast.
let's just say we'll come back at quarter past 1.
1:15, perfect. And we'll invite our submitters to come and join us. There's
Yes.
plenty of food.
There's plenty of food here. It's an open house here, so everybody is welcome to.
Wonderful. Okay, I will stop recording.